Hey, campfire crew, let's get it on. Terror on a Florida Trail, submitted by the Keys Strider. Hey, I'm a new subscriber, and I wanted to share this story of something that happened just last year to me and my fiancée. We're both avid outdoors people, and we decided to go on a serious hike together. We started our 6-week through hike of the Florida Trail in early January after months of planning. We entered the Ocala section from the south near the Ocala National Forest, and this was my first long trail. My fiancée, Hannah, however, had more experience than I did. She'd done sections of the Appalachian Trail, but Florida was new to both of us. Most people don't realize how isolated parts of Central Florida can be. Everyone thinks of beaches and highways and Walt Disney World. But once you're inside Ocala, especially between the Juniper Prairie Wilderness and the stretch north toward Rodman Reservoir, the forest seems to swallow everything up. Longleaf pines and palmetto thickets with white sand roads that disappear into nothing. The first encounter we had happened near a sandy forest road crossing south of Juniper Springs. We'd been hiking all day through scrub and winegrass, and the trail crossed a wide, pale service road with tire ruts baked hard as stone. We came up on a beat-up, oxidized green pickup that was parked beneath a pine about 50 yards down the road. There were 2 men leaning against it. They weren't dressed like hikers. They had mud-caked boots and were wearing jeans. One was even in a camo jacket. The other was chewing something slow and steady, his jaw working like a machine, and I kind of smiled at that. We nodded first, and always trying to be friendly. I said, "Hey, afternoon." The one in the camo jacket gave a slow smile and said, "Y'all out for a walk?" Hannah said, "Yeah, through hiking, heading north." The guy looked us over carefully. He was looking at our packs, our Lecky trekking poles, the Garmin clipped to my shoulder strap. All he said back was, "Long way to go." The other guy just spit in the sand and said, "Ain't much up ahead, just more woods." None of it was threatening. I mean, not exactly. Just kind of observant the way they were looking at us, like they were sizing us up. We stood there chatting maybe another 30 seconds, and they didn't offer their names and didn't ask for ours. But as we stepped back onto the trail, I swore I could feel their eyes following us long after the road disappeared behind the scrub. "That was weird," Hannah said. I replied, just locals. Maybe they're out hunting." But we didn't see any visible hunting gear. Just them standing next to the truck. My last thought before I forgot about them for a little while was the way they were looking at our stuff. The next morning we broke camp near Hidden Pond and pushed north through the Juniper Prairie Wilderness. It's one of the most remote parts of the trail, flat open stretches where the sky feels enormous and there's nowhere to hide. Around mid-morning, I heard it for the first time. An engine. First it was faint, kind of far off, and then it seemed to just go away. Hannah said, probably the Forest Service. But there aren't many roads cutting through that section, and the sound came from deeper inside the wilderness area, where vehicles aren't supposed to be at all. We brushed it off. By afternoon, though, strange things started to happen. We found fresh boot prints crossing the trail. They weren't trail runners, they weren't hiking boots. They were of a heavy tread, leaving deep heel impressions. We hadn't seen anything like that so far. Maybe someone's section hiking from the other direction, Hannah suggested. But the prints didn't follow the trail. They paralleled it, about 20 feet off to the side. And they were going in the same direction we were. That night we camped north of Juniper Prairie, planning to push toward the Rodman section the following day. We tucked ourselves into a patch of scrub oak well off the main trail. Around midnight, I woke up. I didn't know why. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Soft, but deliberate. You could hear the sand crunching. and then they stopped. I just held my breath, and Hannah stirred beside me but didn't wake up. Then I could hear the steps, now circling us, slowly, a wide arc around our tent. Then it was silence. I unzipped the tent just a crack. There was nothing but pine trunks and starlight out there. But I did not fall back asleep that night. On day 3, we moved fast, faster than usual. We crossed forest roads I didn't remember on the map, and sandy lanes that weren't marked on Guthook. Once, far down on one of them, I thought I saw a green vehicle partially hidden by the brush, but when I blinked it was gone. But for some reason, the forest started to feel wrong, but not natural wrong, human wrong, if you get what I mean. At one water cache near the Rodman Reservoir section, a gallon jug left by some trail angels had been slashed open, and the good water had spilled into the sand. "No animal did that," Hannah whispered. And that was the moment my fear became real. Someone was watching us, and they were close enough to interfere with our hike. Later that afternoon, I heard the engine again, closer this time. We stepped off the trail and hid in the thick palmettos as the sound passed on a parallel road that we couldn't see. The truck never appeared, but we both recognized the rhythm of that motor. Hannah squeezed my arm and said, "It's gotta be them." I didn't argue. We debated getting off the trail at the next road crossing, but pride and denial are powerful things. Deep down, I didn't want to believe we were actually being hunted. So we camped that night just south of where the trail begins bending toward the outskirts of Palatka. Still remote, still miles from town. The forest seemed darker out there. It seemed heavier. And at dusk, we heard a whistle, just one sharp note. Then another farther away, like it was answering the first one. We didn't cook dinner that night. We didn't use headlamps. We just laid in the tent in full darkness. And at around 10 p.m., I heard the engine start up again. This time, it was too close for me. It seemed to idle for a long time and then shut off. Then I heard footsteps again, more than one set, making no attempt to be quiet now. We heard branches snapping, and a beam of light swept through the trees, thin and searching for us. Hannah's breathing turned shallow, and the beam passed on our tent. And it seemed like I could feel it. And then a man's voice drifted through the pines. "Y'all lost?" Another voice just broke out into laughter. They knew we weren't lost. The tent zipper trembled in my hand, and I whispered to Hannah, "When I say run, run." The light moved away briefly. Maybe they were circling us again, or waiting. I wasn't going to wait to find out. I burst out of the tent and grabbed Hannah's hand, saying, "Run!" And we ran. No headlamps, no flashlights. Just starlight and instinct. Behind us, we could hear shouting, "Hey! Hey! Get back here!" We heard the engine roar to life again, and they must have been parked on a nearby sand road that we couldn't see. We crashed through the palmettos, thorns tearing at our legs, and I didn't care about our gear. We left half of it behind. Sleeping pads, food, you name it. We aimed east towards where I knew a forest road eventually led towards Highway 19, and beyond that, the outskirts of Palatka. We could hear the truck engine revving, and for a split second, I knew they were trying to cut us off. We dove into a low cypress depression, splashing through the cold black water to mask our tracks. I just pulled Hannah into the mud, and we crouched there, submerged to our thighs, not caring what was in there. Could have been anything. Snakes, hell, even a gator. Headlights swept across the trees above us, and we heard the truck crawling past on a road, maybe 50 yards away. One of them shouted, "They ain't going far." We just stayed in that water until the engine noise faded. Then we moved again, slower now and shivering. But after what felt like hours, the forest thinned, and we stumbled onto a gravel road. A proper road. It had reflective markers. Then we broke out into a run, and we did not stop running. About a mile later, we saw the glow of streetlights and knew we were at Palatka. I've never been so relieved to see a gas station. We burst inside, soaked and bleeding, and the clerk stared at us like we were ghosts. We immediately called the sheriff. They came out and took a statement from us, and then drove out to where we described. But they didn't find anything. No men, no truck. The next day when we returned to our campsite with law enforcement to retrieve our gear, the campsite had been wiped clean. There was nothing there, no footprints, no slashed water jug, no sign that we had ever even been there. Except for one thing. Pinned to a pine tree with a hunting knife was a scrap of our tent footprint, the ground sheet we left behind, and written on it in black marker, like a kid had done it, were the words, "Long way to go." We ended our through hike right there and just got back home. I still think about how remote those stretches of the Florida Trail really are, and how easy it would be for someone to live out there and just watch and wait for people like us. You know, most people think the dangers in Florida are the meth heads, the gators, or the snakes. And I don't think it is. I think it's the roads that don't appear on maps, and the locals who know them better than anyone like me ever will. Something Outside My Window Kept Calling My Dog by Archer Hott. I was 20 years old when this happened, in 2023. I live in a quiet suburb in Southern California, and it was a rainy night sometime around 9 p.m. My family had just finished dinner and everyone went to their rooms. My parents' room is toward the back of the house facing the backyard, and my room faces the street. I have a large window right next to my bed, and that night I had it slightly open because I like the cool air when it rains. My two dogs were on my bed with me. I was sitting at my desk scrolling on Pinterest trying to decide what I wanted to paint, and that's when I heard it. Clear as day, I heard my mom's voice from outside my window say, "Bean, Bean." Bean is my dog's name. At first I didn't think anything of it. I just assumed maybe my mom stepped outside for some reason. But then I paused. Our front door is old and heavy and loud, and you can hear it open from anywhere in the house. I never heard it open. So I froze and listened again. "Bean, Bean." It sounded exactly like her. Same tone, same cadence, and not yelling, just casually calling him. My dog immediately reacted. He lifted his head and stared toward the window, and his ears were perked up. He wasn't barking, he was just intensely focused. I felt this slow, sick feeling in my stomach. And I called out to my mom, and she answered from her room and said, "No, Mia, I'm in here with your stepdad." I asked if she had gone outside, and she said no. While I was still on the phone with her, I heard it again. "Bean, Beanie Weenie." That stopped my heart. Beanie Weenie was his nickname, and this time it didn't sound exactly like my mom. It sounded like my sister. My mom and sister have similar voices, but slightly different tones. And somehow, whatever was outside sounded like both of them at different moments. My sister was at work at that night. I checked her location. She was in the next town over, and she didn't get off until 11. I slowly walked to my window and looked outside. There's a streetlight directly across from my house, so even though it was raining, the front yard was dimly lit. There was no one there. There was no car, no silhouette, no movement, just rain hitting the pavement. Behind me, my dog was still staring at the window. And this thing kept repeating his name, over and over, calm and patient, like it was trying to get him to go outside. At that point, I was panicking. My stepdad went outside and jokingly yelled, "Who's out here scaring my stepdaughter and calling my dog?" But there was no response or footsteps, and nothing running away, just the rain. I shut and locked my window immediately, and I ended up calling my boyfriend at the time because I was shaking so badly. Even he, and he scares easily, didn't know what to say. Nothing else happened that night, but I still think about the way it switched voices and the way my dog knew it was there. Something Sinister, submitted by Cyclone Trent. I was driving north through rural Iowa on a 2-lane county road that cut between what always seemed like endless cornfields, despite the fact that I'm from the area. I was heading to my Uncle Jack's cabin, which was about 25 miles outside of my town. Out there was just nothing but cornfields and a scattering of farmhouses and rusted silos. And half of these little side roads didn't even show up properly on GPS. I was excited to hang out with my Uncle Jack. He was only about 10 years older than me, and we always had a good time when we just hung out, shot the shit, and had a few beers. But I was running late, and it was just after 10:30 p.m. There was no moon out, and there were no other cars on the road. The corn on both sides of it rose taller than my SUV. My headlights were just like looking down a tunnel into the darkness, swallowing up the center lane lines as I drove. I was about 6 or 7 miles from the turnoff to my uncle's place when I saw a shape ahead on the shoulder of the road. And at first it looked like someone standing too close to it, and my heart kicked in hard in my chest, and I slowed down instinctively. The figure didn't move at all. As I got closer, I could see it was a body, but it looked thin and stiff, and it was dressed in what looked like an old Sunday suit. The jacket was really boxy, and the shoulders just seemed too square to be real. And then the face caught in my headlights. It was painted. Cracked white paint with faded red lips and thin black eyebrows arched permanently in a surprised expression. The eyes were glassy and unfocused, and staring straight ahead into the corn. It was one of those old-style mannequins, the kind you see now in antique stores, not the sleek, faceless ones that are in modern clothing shops, but the heavy plaster ones with those painted-on features, the fake molded hair, and stiff, frozen bodies. It was just standing there on the gravel shoulder, turned slightly toward the road. I laughed under my breath, more out of nerves than humor. Real funny whoever put this up, I thought. Some farmer's idea of a joke, I figured, and something to spook teenagers or keep people from speeding. I drove past it. I looked in my rearview mirror, and the mannequin seemed to pivot slightly in the red glow of my taillights, but I'm sure that was just a figment of my imagination. But a mile later, I saw another one. This one was on the opposite side of the road. It was a female mannequin in a faded blue dress, one arm bent at the elbow as if she was waving. The paint on her face was chipped badly around the mouth, exposing gray plaster beneath as I drove by. She was positioned closer to the asphalt than the first one, almost like she was taking a step towards the road. Who would haul these things out there? And why space them out like that? I drove past her, and soon she was behind me. I looked forward, and the road just stretched on into the darkness. I kept driving for another minute or so, and then another mannequin appeared around the next curve. Then another. They weren't evenly spaced out. Sometimes there'd be a long stretch of nothing, just road and cornfields, and then suddenly one would be there, standing there, half hidden in the corn, angled toward the road like it was watching me or coming out of the corn after me. One was missing an arm, and one was positioned sitting on an overturned milk crate, legs stiff and straight out in front of it. Every single one of them, though, faced the road, faced me as I had to drive by them. I started checking my rearview mirror more often than the road ahead, as I was getting this feeling that I wasn't alone. The weirdest one of all stood directly at the edge of the pavement, and I didn't see it until I was almost on top of it. It was wearing a child's overalls, and I could see that the paint on its face was fresher than the others, less cracked. Its head was tilted slightly downward, but its eyes were angled up, so it seemed to be looking directly into mine as I passed. Its mouth was open, painted in a small, round O, as if it were screaming. I just hit the gas. The road dipped slightly and curved between some thicker sections of corn, and my headlights flickered across wooden fence posts and sagging barbed wire. And then I saw the crowd. At first, it looked like a car accident. My stomach dropped into my shoes. About 50 yards ahead, something was sprawled across the road, so I braked hard, my tires squealing before they gripped the asphalt. My headlights illuminated a chaotic scene. Mannequins, at least a dozen of them. They were arranged in the middle of the road in some kind of grotesque tableau. One was laying face down near the double yellow line. Another was sprawled on its back, one leg twisted up unnaturally, and two were positioned as if kneeling beside the fallen one, arms extended in frozen gestures of panic. A larger male mannequin lay near what looked like a smashed wooden sawhorse painted to resemble a car bumper. It was painted red, thick and glossy, and there was also red paint splattered across the male mannequin's chest, and I could see there was paint on the pavement beneath it. This whole thing was staged to look like someone had plowed through a group of people. I sat there just listening to my engine. For some reason, I'd rolled down my windows, and I could hear the corn rustling on both sides of the road. Suddenly, I felt terrified. This wasn't random. This wasn't just a bunch of junk dumped along the side of the road. This was arranged and planned. I sat there for several seconds debating on what I should do. I could have reversed it and tried to turn around, but the road was pretty narrow and the ditches were steep on either side. And what if there were more behind me at this point? So I was just sitting there, my headlights lighting up the scene, and the painted faces just stared upwards, sideways, at each other, and at me. I said to myself, I just need to move them. This is just some kind of sick joke, that's all. So I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, though the headlights were already illuminating everything. Somehow the small beam in my hand felt like protection. I got out of my SUV, and the night seemed darker than ever. The wind was moving through the fields in slow waves, and it sounded like someone dragging their hands across paper. I approached the nearest mannequin, the one lying face down, and up close the paint was cracked deeply, spiderwebbing across its cheeks and neck. I nudged it with my foot. It was pretty heavy, old-time plaster. I bent down and grabbed it under the arms, intending to drag it off to the side of the road. And that's when the voice cut through the darkness. "You killed him!" It wasn't right next to me, but it wasn't far away either, and it came from the corn to my left. It was high-pitched, male or female, I couldn't really tell. My heart stopped. The voice screamed out again, "You killed him!" It was closer now, and what I heard next froze me in terror. "You're next." The corn exploded in movement. I could hear running, multiple sets of footsteps crashing through the corn stalks. I just dropped the mannequin and stumbled backwards, nearly falling over. My phone slipped out of my hand and clattered onto the road, and its light was spinning around wildly. "You're next!" the voice shrieked again, now from my right. Whoever this was, they were moving fast and seemed to be circling me. I lunged for my phone, snatched it up, and hauled ass towards my SUV. The corn on both sides seemed to be thrashing violently, and I caught flashes of white between the stalks. White clothing. There were figures pushing through the corn, keeping pace with me as I ran. I had left my door open, thankfully. I jumped inside, slammed it shut, just as something burst from the field on the passenger side. 3 adult figures, all dressed in white. Their faces were pale in my headlights, but I couldn't tell if they were wearing masks or it was some kind of paint or makeup. One of them raised an arm towards me, but I didn't wait for anything else to happen. I threw my SUV into drive and hit the gas. The front bumper smashed into the nearest mannequin, and there was a sickening crack as the plaster exploded. Then another body rolled beneath my tires, crunching. Something struck the side of my vehicle really hard, but I don't know what it was. I just kept both my foot and my head down. I kept plowing through this weird display of mannequins, and painted heads were snapping off and bouncing across the road. And finally, I was through. In the rearview mirror, I saw the 3 white figures standing in the middle of the road amid the wreckage. I saw one of them begin to start running after me, and I didn't slow down for the rest of the drive, though. I made the turn onto the gravel road to my Uncle Jack's cabin so fast I fishtailed but held on for dear life and kept going. As I approached his cabin, the lights were on, and I was thanking God over and over and over. I jumped out, ran up to the door, and started pounding on it. My uncle opened it with a startled expression that shifted quickly to alarm. "What the hell happened to your car?" I know I looked insane. "There's people out there, man," I was gasping air. "Mannequins, set up on the road, and they started chasing me." Uncle Jack just pulled me inside and locked the door. And I told him everything in a rush. I told him about the mannequins, the accident scene, the voices, and the figures in white. He listened without interrupting me, but his jaw tightened. "That road's empty most nights," he said. "You sure you didn't just..." And it was all he got out because I interrupted. "They were real. The people were real. You can see my vehicle." He got out a beer and a shot, and we did a Boilermaker together, the first of many that night. We finally fell asleep, and at first light, we decided that we should drive back and check it out. My SUV bore the evidence. There was a couple of dents, there was some streaks of red paint on the side, and there were bits of plaster wedged into the grille. But when we finally reached the stretch of road where I had seen where everything had happened, there was nothing. There were no mannequins, there wasn't any junk or debris, there wasn't any red paint, there wasn't anything. The asphalt was clean as a whistle. I got out and walked into the center of the road. It was like it never even happened. And I remember saying out loud, "No fucking way." We looked on the ditches. We searched the edges of the fields. There was no sign that any heavy plaster mannequins had ever been out there. That's when Uncle Jack called my name. He was standing near the shoulder, a few yards ahead of me. At the base of a wooden fence post sat a single mannequin head. Its painted face was smashed in, the left side caved and splintered from where my SUV must have hit it. But the eyes were still intact, staring upward. There was an axe right next to it, buried into the ground. Not just rested there, its head was embedded deep into the dirt. The blade was sunk so far down that only the handle protruded. There was something dark on the metal. Not red paint. Something thicker. Uncle Jack didn't say anything, and neither did I. We just stood there for a few minutes looking around. But then we just left everything there. We drove back to the cabin in silence, and we spent the rest of the weekend enjoying our company. When I left Sunday, I took a completely different highway home, which added almost an hour to the drive, but I didn't care. I was not going back down that road by myself again. The Sitting Man by Steve. Ever since I could remember, there was a guy who lived up in the woods across from my house when I was growing up. He was sort of screwed up after serving 3 tours in Vietnam, but he was a really nice guy. About 5 years ago, he got into some financial trouble, and the bank took his house. Shortly afterward, his wife divorced him, and to make a long story short, his life went to hell. He ended up living in this tent-like thing year-round, and he was in every sense an alcoholic, and he'd pretty much given up on life. A few winters back, the temperature was below zero for like 3 months or so, and I remember driving home from work and seeing him all bundled up, sitting on the side of the road playing solitaire. He always was playing solitaire. And sometimes at night, you could hear him screaming out, I guess from his flashbacks. But in a way, it was the only way that I knew that he hadn't frozen to death. Well, after about 2 months, the cold caught up with him. The state police found him frozen solid up on the hill, about 75 yards from my house. This past summer, I was driving home from work at around 12:45 in the morning, and as I put on my turn signal to turn into my driveway, I saw someone seated on the side of the road, covered in blankets and looking down at the ground. I drove past, not really taking full stock of the situation, but asking myself why someone would be all bundled up. For God's sake, it was 80 degrees outside. And then it hit me, and I realized who it was. I slammed on my brakes and threw the car into reverse, and I backed up about 15 yards. I looked frantically around in the fields beyond where he was sitting, thinking maybe he had taken off running. I didn't see anything, but I did notice that the grass on which he had been sitting was all matted down and showed signs of being depressed. My cousin, who I didn't tell this to until last month, told me he's experienced the same thing, also in late August. He was afraid that everyone would think he was crazy, so we kept it a secret between us, and we still think everyone will think we're crazy if we tell them, so we probably always will keep it a secret. The Last Guy I Would Have Thought It Was. Submitted by Becky. I was a sophomore at a small university in Oklahoma, a long way from home. I hailed from Cortland, New York. I'd been accepted to plenty of schools in New York, but wanted to get away, and this place looked like I really wanted to do, and they had my major. I'd originally gone in as a biology major, pre-med, because that's what you did when you were smart back home. But halfway through my sophomore year in 2016, after way too many sleepless nights in the library and one panic attack in a chemistry lab, I switched to education. I really wanted to teach. I wanted my own classroom, bulletin boards, and kids who really were looking for help that I thought I could help. But that was when I met him, Professor Harlan. He was new to the school that semester. He was in his early 30s, clean-cut, wore wire-rimmed glasses, and was the kind of guy who wore jackets in Oklahoma heat like he was auditioning for a movie about academia. He taught a class called Introduction to Educational Theory, which was required for my new major. And the first time he called on me in class, I thought it was random. "Ms. Callahan," he said, glancing at his roster. "You're from New York?" "Yes," I answered, surprised that he noticed. "Interesting perspective," he said. "How do urban school systems there compare to what we see here?" I answered as best I could, and to be honest, it felt flattering. Professors rarely paid attention to sophomores, especially transfers between majors. After class, he stopped me and said, "You got a strong voice. Education needs people like you." I practically floated back to my off-campus house that afternoon and told my roommates, Tess and Mariah, that I'd finally found my path. "See," Tess said, stretching out on our sagging couch, "Oklahoma ain't so bad, girl." She was right. I was liking it here. But then the emails started a few weeks later. At first, they came through my school account. Comments about assignments, extra articles that Professor Harlan thought I'd enjoy, invitations to consider a research assistant position in the fall. I just told myself he was mentoring me. But then the tone shifted. "You look distracted in class today. Is everything all right?" I chalked that up to him just being concerned about me. But the next one kind of rubbed me the wrong way. "Red is definitely your color," it said. I had worn a red sweater that day, but that one made me pause. I stared at it longer than I should have. It wasn't explicitly inappropriate. Professors notice things. And I guess that didn't really mean anything, right? A few days later, I found a book on my desk in class before a lecture. It was a first edition of a children's literature anthology, and inside the cover, written in careful blue ink, read, "For someone who will shape young minds beautifully." There was no signature. I asked the girl who usually sat behind me if she'd seen anyone put it there. She shook her head and said, "Nah, it was there when I came in." I waited until after class to ask Professor Harlan if he knew who left it. He just looked at me and genuinely, or maybe convincingly, confused. "Huh," he said, "that's odd, but how wonderful. You must have an admirer." He smiled in a way that made my stomach kind of turn for the first time. And then the anonymous emails started. Not through my school account, through my personal Gmail. I'd never given that email to any professor. One subject line read, "You shine when you speak." And I remember the exact prickle that crawled up my spine. The message inside was short. "You don't belong in the cold. You belong somewhere that sees you." Again, no name, no signature, and not an email address I recognized. I showed Tess, and she said, "Fuck it, block it. Probably some dude from class who got your email off the student directory." I told her, "I'm not in the student directory." So we double-checked. Yep, I'd opted out of that freshman year. The next email came 2 days later. "Love the blue door on your house, and I especially like the wreath." That time, I couldn't breathe for a few seconds after reading it. Our house did have a blue door, and Mariah had hung a stupid burlap wreath on it with fake sunflowers. "Okay," Mariah said when I showed them both the email. "This isn't just happening on campus. I mean, that's our house." We filed a report with campus security the next morning, but the officer behind the desk, this middle-aged and bored fat fuck, barely looked up from his computer. "Any threats?" he asked. "Well, no, but, well, there's not much we can do," he interrupted. "Just block the email and document everything." "That's it?" Tess said. He shrugged. "Probably just some kid with a crush." Well, I still was feeling very uneasy. The emails kept coming from different addresses each time now. "You walk fast when you're nervous. You sing in the kitchen when you think you're alone. And I prefer your hair down." These details were getting very specific, they were too intimate, and I was getting scared. We started double-checking that all of our doors were locked, and we bought pepper spray. Mariah's older brother came by and installed some motion lights near the driveway, and I became hyper-aware of everything. The sound of footsteps behind me on campus, the way a car might idle too long at our curb, and the feeling of being watched in class. And then there was Professor Harlan. He started hanging around too long after lectures, asking me to stay back to discuss lesson plans. His eyes seemed to settle on me in a way that felt heavy, like a hand pressing down on my shoulders. And one afternoon as I packed up my bag, he said quietly, "You seem really anxious lately." "I'm fine," I said. "Becky, you can trust me. If you're going through anything, I'm here for you. I'm a great listener. If something's bothering you, you can tell me." I felt strange. "Why would you think someone's bothering me?" I asked. He just looked at me for a beat too long and said, "I don't know. You just seem on edge lately. Again, my office door is always open." I told myself I was being paranoid, that the trauma from the emails was making me suspicious of everyone. He'd done nothing but support me so far. But a few nights later, I changed my mind. That's the night I saw his car. It was parked across from our house. It was a black car with a university faculty sticker in the corner of the windshield, and I recognized those from the faculty lot. I stood frozen looking out the living room window, and Tess whispered, "What is it?" "That's his car," I said. "Are you sure?" I nodded. "It's got to be Professor Harlan's car." It pulled away slowly after a few minutes, but the next day in class, Professor Harlan was acting normal, smiling. He even made a joke about Oklahoma thunderstorms. When our eyes met, though, something passed between us. Something like we knew we knew. We went to the police that week with printed emails and photos of the car outside our house. We snapped on our phones. The officer who took our statement looked sympathetic, but again tired. "Unless you can prove it's him sending the emails, we can't accuse a faculty member," he said. "I mean, there hasn't been any direct threats, and there's been no physical contact." I asked him, "So I just have to wait?" He just said, "Document everything." I felt like I was shouting into a void. By the end of October, I stopped going anywhere alone. And on Halloween weekend, my friends broke that rule. Mariah turned 21 that week, and we went to a nightclub downtown to celebrate. It was crowded and loud and smelled like spilled beer and cheap perfume, and for a few hours, though, I felt almost normal. I'd worn a black dress and boots, and I'd left my hair down, which I normally kept up. I didn't realize until later how much that would matter. Around midnight, Tess had met a guy she'd been talking to and dragged Mariah to the dance floor. I went over to the bar for a beer. And that's when I felt it. That unmistakable sensation of someone staring at me. I scanned through the crowd, and I saw him across the room near the exit. Professor Harlan, talking to some people. No stupid jacket, just a dark button-down. He looked like he was enjoying his conversation, but then he looked up and locked eyes with me and didn't stop his gaze. For some reason, my blood turned to ice. I shoved through the crowd towards Tess, but by the time I reached the dance floor, I'd lost sight of him. I just saw Professor Harlan, I told her. Who? Mariah shouted over the music. Harlan, I yelled. And both Tess and Mariah went pale. Okay, we're leaving, said Tess. But in the chaos of grabbing our coats and saying rushed goodbyes to people, I got separated from them near the bathroom hallway. Somebody bumped into me hard, and when I turned back around, my friends were gone. My phone buzzed in my hand. It was an unknown number. A text. I'm glad you wore your hair down. I bolted madly. I pushed myself through the front doors into the October air and started running towards campus and my house. It was only about 6 blocks away, but the streets felt super long that night. Not long after, I could hear footsteps echoing behind me. I mean, they weren't close, but they were there. I didn't even look back. I just cut down a side street lined with dark storefronts, my boots slapping against the pavement. My breath was coming in ragged bursts, and that's when I heard the footsteps behind me quickening. Becky, a voice called softly behind me. I almost tripped. He'd never used my first name outside of class. Yeah, I knew it was him. I just ran harder and harder, and then I felt a hand brush the back of my jacket. I screamed and jerked forward, nearly losing my balance. And then I cut through an alley I'd taken 100 times before during the day, but it felt like a tunnel that night. I just kept running and running towards the light at the far end. But the footsteps kept up behind me steady, like whoever was chasing me knew I had nowhere to go. Then a voice called out, Professor Harlan's. Becky, you're scaring yourself. I just want to talk. I reached the end of the alley and burst onto my street. Our house, the blue door, the stupid wreath, was a half block away. My legs were on fire, and my lungs felt like they were collapsing. I still heard him behind me. I was trying to grab my keys out of my purse while running, and that's when the porch light snapped on, and Mariah was standing in the doorway, eyes wide. Becky, she screamed, and I lunged up the steps just as fingers caught the fabric of my dress. It ripped. I fell forward onto my knees into Mariah, and Tess grabbed us both and pulled us in, slamming the door. We heard him hit it once, very hard, and then silence. We called 911, and this time the police came quickly. They searched the area but didn't find anything. No one was around matching the description of Professor Harlan. The next morning when we went to campus security, they told us they'd get back to us. They did later that afternoon, telling us that Professor Harlan had an alibi. Yes, he'd been at the bar, but he'd left the nightclub hours earlier before. He even had a receipt from the bar printed out when he'd paid his tab and left. And that was according to the staff. But I know what I saw. 2 days later, he didn't show up for class. And by the end of the week, we were told by the department chair that Professor Harlan had resigned for personal reasons. But the emails stopped. Sometimes, late at night, I still think about how he knew my hair was down before I even saw him in that club. About how he always seemed to be one step ahead of me. How campus security closed my case and the police said without direct evidence there was little they could do. But I graduated, I moved back to New York, and I'm happy teaching now, just finishing up my master's. But even now, years later, when the wind kicks up, it reminds me of the Oklahoma wind. And how scared I once felt, and how someone I trusted was someone I didn't know at all. Grim Reaper, submitted by Sean. I'm 17 years old and live in a small town called St. Cloud, located in Florida. What happened to me is scary as hell, I think. One night, about 3 years ago, when I was around 14, I'd fallen asleep on the couch. At about 2:30 in the morning, I got a bad feeling like someone was watching me, and I woke up. Well, when I got up to go to my room, I had to walk into the kitchen. And when I got underneath the door frame that connected the living room and the kitchen, out of nowhere, I had a sharp, very cold feeling hit me in the back, and I couldn't breathe. That lasted for about 30 seconds. In that 30 seconds, I couldn't breathe, and my eyes rolled back into my head. But as fast as it had come, it suddenly was gone. When I looked at my hands, they were white-knuckled because I had grabbed the door frame so hard to hold myself up. Yeah, I was freaking out, and I was wide awake by then. So, when I went under the doorframe of the kitchen and hallway, it happened a second time, except it hit me from the front and went out my back. It was the worst feeling imaginable. After the second time, I practically ran to my room and jumped into my bed and hid under my covers. Yeah, I know, sounds like I was a baby. But I was just so freaked out because I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was there watching me when this all happened. So I poked my head out from underneath my blanket, and I looked at my door, and I saw someone standing there. The best description I can give is it looked like the Grim Reaper, except without the sickle. As I was looking at this thing, I had a feeling of fear all inside me, like I thought the worst was over, and now this is happening. Well, as I was watching it, all of a sudden it kind of turned its head up as if to look at me, and I saw what looked to be its eyes. They seemed to sort of glow, like this mix between fire red and jet black. It stood at my door for a good 5 minutes, and then all of a sudden, it was gone. When it left, I finally got rid of the feeling of fear and that feeling of being watched. But after that, there was no way I was going back to sleep, so I stayed awake until morning. The strange thing is, after this happened, I seemed to have this ability to see things that others can't see. Like people standing someplace, and others turning around to look at them and no one's there. But the thing about it is, I don't get the feeling of fear I did when I saw that thing in my room. Honestly, when I see these people who aren't there to everyone else, it's like a feeling of comfort. I don't get scared, and I feel glad sometimes because they're there. It's almost as if they're trying to protect me. The Crazy on My Night Shift, submitted by Lars. I was 23 in 2019. I was taking classes at Mid-Plains Community College during the day and working the graveyard shift at a convenience store on a 2-lane highway in western Nebraska. If you've never been out this way at night, you can't really understand how isolated everything feels. The land is flat, and it's open for miles. Hardly any trees, no hills, just fields and sky, and a wind that never really stops moving. My store sat at a crossroads between 3 tiny towns, and it was the only place within 30 miles that stayed open 24/7. After midnight, it was just me, the hum of the fluorescent lights, and whatever person happened to come in out of the night. From 11 p.m. to 5:30 a.m., I worked alone. Most nights were boring. Sure, some truckers came through around midnight every night, and now and then a ranch hand might stop in for coffee. But by 3, it was dead. I just swipe down the counters, restock cigarettes, and scroll through homework on my laptop. The first time this guy came in, it was 1:18 a.m. The bell above the door gave its usual tired jingle, and I looked up from the register to see a tall guy in a dark coat and jeans step inside. He had a baseball cap on, pulled low, and dirty, heavy work boots. "Evening," I said. He didn't respond, which really wasn't unusual. Plenty of guys don't feel like talking at that hour. He walked down the first aisle slowly, not scanning shelves like someone shopping. He was just moving, hands at his sides and head turning slightly left and right every once in a while. After about 30 seconds, I called out, "Hey, let me know if you need anything." He stopped mid-step, Then he turned his head towards me, and he didn't blink, he didn't nod, he didn't smile, he just stared at me. And it wasn't an angry stare, and it wasn't like a confused stare, it was just this blank face. It made me nervous, so I forced a small smile and said, "Hey, I've got fresh coffee on." He stared at me for another few seconds and then turned around and walked straight out of the door, the bell jingling again. I watched through the glass as he crossed the lot and climbed into a dark car parked near the air pump. He sat there for a moment, then drove off without ever even going near the gas pumps. I thought, man, that was weird, but whatever. 20 minutes later, at 1:38 a.m., the bell rang again. It was the same guy. He walked down the second aisle this time. The aisle with the chips, beef jerky, canned soup. It was the same slow pace that he had as before, and the same silent scanning of the store. Again, I felt nervous and said, "Hey, do you need anything?" He stopped, turned, and stared again. The silence stretched long enough that the hum of the coolers sounded louder than usual to me. But like he did before, he just turned and walked out. I checked the clock. 1:41 a.m. When he came back at 2:01, my hands were already sweating. This time he walked all the way to the back coolers and stood in front of the glass doors. He didn't open any of them. He just stood there looking at his reflection. I looked down and could see him on the security monitor beside the register, and I said, "Sir, can I help you find something?" He slowly turned his head towards me, and the fluorescent lights made his skin look pale and stretched too tight over his cheekbones. He looked kind of like a skeleton. But he just stared and then left. That was the pattern for the next hour and a half. Every 20 minutes, he came back in. And each time he walked in, he just wandered around and never touched a single item. Every time I asked if he needed help, he stopped and stared at me like I'd said something profoundly confusing. And he never spoke, and I gotta be honest, I never saw him really blink. He just stared, and then he would leave. By 3 a.m., the wind outside had picked up and it was rattling the big front windows. The lot was otherwise empty. I didn't have any other customers, just this guy and his car returning like clockwork every 20 minutes. On his sixth visit, I felt my patience snap. "Man, what the hell are you doing?" I said as he stepped inside. "If you're not going to buy anything, you can't keep coming in here." He stopped in the middle of the aisle, turned around and stared at me. But this time, something was different. He took a couple of steps towards the counter. I got nervous. For a second there, I was feeling like a tough guy, but now I was nervous. "You can't loiter here," I said, my voice sounding pretty pussified, more than I wanted it to. He stopped about 8 feet from the register, and his eyes were wide open, and it looked like he was trying not to blink. We stood there looking at each other in silence for what felt like a full minute. Then he left again. I grabbed my phone and texted my boss, Rick. I told him some guy keeps coming in every 20 minutes. He's not buying anything. He's just staring at me. Rick responded a few minutes later saying, "Probably tweaked out. Lock the door for a bit if he's bugging you." Now, company policy said that we weren't supposed to lock the doors unless there was a direct threat. But before I could do anything, at 3:25, the bell rang again. This time I noticed something wrong immediately. Same guy, but his coat looked bulkier, like he had something underneath it. He was walking slower than before, kind of shuffling. I took a deep breath and said, "Look, man, do you need something or not?" He didn't respond, and instead of going to the aisles where he'd normally been going, he walked straight towards me. I'm not going to lie, my heart started pounding, and I just weakly said, "Sir?" He stopped right in front of me, close enough that I could smell something metallic and sour. Then he reached inside his coat slowly and deliberately, and every muscle in my body was locking up. He pulled something out and dropped it on the counter, and it landed with a heavy, wet thud. I stumbled back so hard I hit the cigarette display. On my counter was a raccoon, a very dead raccoon. Its fur was matted with dark and drying blood, and one side of its skull looked like it had been caved in. Its mouth was hanging open, teeth stuck in a frozen snarl, and in addition to the drying blood, there was fresh blood on its chest and belly. A smear of red streaked across my counter now, and for a few seconds, I couldn't breathe or move. The store smelled like iron, and this guy just rested his hands lightly on the edge of the counter, and for the first time all night, he spoke. His voice was kind of soft when he said, "God killed this raccoon." I stared at him, my brain refusing to process what I was seeing. He leaned slightly forward and said, "Do you think he's going to visit us now?" The question just hung there in the air. I didn't know what to say. I didn't answer. I couldn't. And all the while, he never broke eye contact and never blinked. We stood like that for a long time. I couldn't tell you how long. 30 seconds, a minute, I have no idea, but at the time it felt endless. Then his lips curled up into a smile. Not like a full shit-eating grin. Not a super wide smile, just enough to show the edges of his teeth. He turned, walked to the door, and the bell jingled as he went outside. I didn't move for a few minutes, and then survival instinct kicked in. I ran to the door and locked it, flipped the close sign around, and my hands were shaking so badly I could barely fit the key into the deadbolt. I turned around back to the counter, and of course the raccoon was still there, blood slowly creeping toward the edge of it. This was real. I called Rick, and he answered on the third ring. "You better get down here," I said. My voice was cracking. "I'm not kidding, Rick. Like now." He sleepily said, "What happened?" And I said, "Just get here." He lived about 15 minutes away, but didn't show up until 5:30, when his shift normally started. I was standing behind the counter with a baseball bat in my lap. The car and the guy never came back. When Rick walked in, I showed him the raccoon first. He stared at it and then at me. "What the hell, kid?" I just responded, "I told you." He kept coming in every 20 minutes. We got a thick trash can liner and bagged the raccoon and set it outside for animal control. And then Rick said, "All right, let's check the cameras." We went into the back office and he pulled up the footage from the night. At 1:18 a.m., the bell jingled and the door opened. There I was behind the counter, but no one came in. The aisle cameras showed empty rows. Rick fast-forwarded. 1:38 a.m. The door opened. No one came in. 2:01 a.m. Same thing. Every single time the bell rang on tape, the door swung inward, but there was no man walking through the door, let alone around the store. I felt like I was going to puke. "That's not possible," I whispered. Rick sped it up to 3:25 on the final visit. On the camera, I was standing behind the counter, and then suddenly I jumped backward, as if something had been thrown at me. On the video, the counter was empty. There was no raccoon in the frame. No blood, no guy, no raccoon, just me recoiling in thin air. Rick slowly turned to look at me. "Kid, there's nobody there." I felt like the floor had tilted under me. We both went out to the back of the store. The raccoon was real, and there was still blood smeared across the white laminate counter. I had to scrub it off myself. We went back inside, and animal control came in a little while and took the body. Then the sheriff stopped by to take a report, but what could I even say? There was no evidence on camera, there were no vehicles in the lot, and other customers who came in around 4 a.m. showed up clearly on the tape. Their faces, them making purchases, them drinking coffee, all of that. But from 1:18 to 3:25, every time that bell rang, the footage showed an empty store. I finished that shift, and I finished that semester working at the store. But I never worked another night alone without feeling like something was just outside the range of the cameras. I thank my lucky stars that guy never came back, at least not in any way that I could see. But like I said, I finished up my semester, and I quit that job 3 months later. Oftentimes I replay in my head what that guy had said to me. God killed this raccoon. do you think he's going to visit us now? And I gotta be honest, I don't know what scares me more, that the man might have been real, or that the cameras tell me he wasn't. Hey gang, thanks for listening to this episode. If you have a true scary story of any nature that you'd like me to narrate, email it to unclejosh.truescarystories@gmail.com. I read them all. If you're catching this on YouTube and you like what you heard and saw, why not give the video a thumbs up, share it with a friend, leave a comment. I'd love to know what you thought of the stories. It's all free and it all helps out with the algorithms, so I appreciate it. Follow me on social media, and if you'd like to take your support a step further, find a link to my Patreon page in the description and consider getting some Uncle Josh and Campfire Crew merchandise. A link to my TeePublic storefront is also in the description. Everyone, be excellent to each other, and until next time, be wary of things that go bump in the night. It could be anything: a ghost, a monster, or the guy next door.